Ladies and gentlemen, there is a world beyond the thin veil. We call life a realm that sits just past the final inhalation, a dimension that the living cannot perceive, yet the dying inevitably enter. Tibetan wisdom teaches us that death is not an end, but a transition, a crossing into a space where consciousness continues to move, to see, to experience. One of the most profound guides to this journey is the Tibetan Book of the Dead, a text that offers what is essentially a map of the soul's travels after the body falls away. Today, I invite you to step with me into that second gate of the after-death journey, the Chönyid Bardo, the bardo of the unfolding reality, the landscape where the mind meets its own reflections. Whether you approach this as spiritual, teaching, psychological symbolism, or metaphoric philosophy, this journey reveals something universal. The mind continues to shape experience even beyond the limits of the physical world. If you enjoy deep reflection, spiritual insight, and philosophical exploration, I encourage you to subscribe and turn on notifications so we can walk these paths of thought together, all the way to the end. 1. What is the Chönyid Bardo? According to Tibetan Buddhist tradition, consciousness does not vanish immediately after death. The body cools, the breath stops, but the inner awareness remains. Awake, sometimes more vividly awake than it ever was during life. It hovers between worlds, neither here nor there, suspended between what was and what will be. This between is known as the Bardo, a Tibetan word meaning literally the interval between two states. Among the 6 forms of Bardo, the second phase, the Chönyid Bardo, or the Bardo of the luminous visions, is the stage where the soul begins to encounter a series of symbolic, often dramatic visions. These visions are not external beings, not spirits, not gods descending from heavenly realms. They are projections of one's own mind, the mind stripped bare, free from the physical senses, free from the illusions we clung to in life, revealing the raw force of our karma, desires, fears, and memories. The traditional term Hyunzang, the bardo of the unfolding manifestations, refers precisely to this, a transitional state where the deceased awakens from the initial unconsciousness of death and begins to witness inner imagery, projected outward as though it were an external world. In this stage, the soul stands at a crossroads. Will it recognize these visions as its own mind and attain liberation? Or will it mistake them for something real and fall once again into the cycle of rebirth? This is why the Chönyid Bardo is considered one of the most critical junctures in the entire passage between death and rebirth. 2. The appearance of the peaceful and wrathful deities. Within the Chönyid Bardo, one encounters 2 categories of symbolic beings described in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. 1. The peaceful deities, Chakjongjon Chijingzun. 2. The wrathful deities, Bunnojon Fennu Song. Western audiences sometimes misunderstand these appearances as literal gods, but the text emphasizes repeatedly, these are not external beings. They are your own mind taking shape. The peaceful deities appear first, radiant figures of calmness, compassion, and clarity. They embody the highest qualities of consciousness, wisdom, openness, freedom. This initial encounter is the first and most direct opportunity for liberation. If the individual recognizes these beings as manifestations of the pure mind, consciousness merges with the clear, light, the most radiant, unified, and liberated state possible. This is enlightenment. It is the exit from the wheel of rebirth. But if the deceased is unprepared, if the bright light is too overwhelming, if they recoil in fear or confusion, the opportunity passes. The cycle then shifts. The visions become darker, more intense, more chaotic. The wrathful deities, known as Bunno Zon Fen Nu Zun, appear with terrifying faces, multiple arms, fiery eyes, and thunderous voices. In ancient illustrations, these beings are depicted with skull crowns, wielding weapons, surrounded by flames. But again, the text insists, they are nothing but the mind's own unresolved emotions, anger, greed, attachment, guilt, trauma, now magnified, because there is no physical body to buffer or suppress them. To the spiritually cultivated mind, these wrathful deities are recognized immediately. Ah, this is my fear taking shape. This is my anger speaking. And in that recognition, liberation is still possible. But to the untrained, the experience becomes overwhelming. Terror leads to avoidance. Avoidance leads to confusion. Confusion leads the soul deeper into illusion, further from the path of awakening. 3. Why do the peaceful deities appear first? This order is deliberate and deeply compassionate. Tibetan Buddhism teaches that the universe grants the soul the simplest, most gentle opportunity for liberation first. The peaceful deities and the clear light behind them represent the soul's true nature, unobscured by fear or ignorance. Those who have meditated during life, who have practiced clarity of mind, often gravitate toward this state instinctively. They feel no threat, no confusion. They recognize themselves. But for others, the light is too bright. Imagine living your entire life in dimness, half-truths, emotional reactivity, egoic habits. Then suddenly, after death, you face the full brilliance of consciousness. It can feel invasive, even painful. Thus, the soul averts its attention, and with that single turn away, the peaceful deities fade. The second opportunity comes in a harsher form. The wrathful deities appear not to punish, but to awaken. They reflect the emotional energies. The soul still clings to fear, anger, desire. If one recognizes these forms as internal projections, liberation is still possible. If not, the visions grow increasingly chaotic, until the momentum of karma pulls the soul toward a new rebirth. This is the profound psychological truth in Tibetan teachings. What we cannot face in life returns to us in death, magnified, unavoidable, and overwhelmingly honest. 4. The 49-day journey through the Bardo. Tibetan tradition teaches that the Bardo state lasts up to 49 days. During this period, consciousness shifts rapidly through phases of clarity, confusion, fear, longing, and insight. The visions are shaped entirely by one's mental tendencies, the karmic seeds planted throughout life. This teaches something essential. Death does not erase who we are. It reveals who we are. The peaceful deities represent the potential we cultivated. The wrathful deities represent the shadows we avoided. And both are simply mirrors. The soul is not punished by external gods. It is confronted by the truth of its own mind. 5. The clear light. The soul's first and greatest opportunity. Immediately after death, before any deities appear, the consciousness encounters the clear light, the purest state of awareness, free from concepts, free from identity, free from ego. In modern psychological terms, it resembles a return to the unconditioned mind. Those who trained the mind during life through meditation, ethical discipline, and awareness can recognize this state. For them, the moment of death becomes a moment of profound liberation. But those who lived with distraction, fear, or attachment often cannot bear this clarity. The soul turns away, and in that turning, the Bardo visions begin. In the end, the Chönyid Bardo teaches a message that transcends culture, religion, and historical time. We cannot escape our own minds. Not in life, not in death. The journey after death is not a passage through distant heavens or hells. It is a passage through ourselves. And perhaps that is why these teachings matter, not because we want to understand what happens after we die, but because they reveal how we are living right now. If you found this exploration meaningful, I invite you to subscribe, join this community, and continue our journey into wisdom traditions, consciousness, and the deeper layers of the human experience. Thank you for staying with me. Until next time, the second week of the Bardo, Why the Peaceful Deities Come First. In Tibetan Buddhism, nothing in the journey after death is random. Every appearance, every vision, every form that rises before the consciousness of the deceased is part of an intricate spiritual map designed to guide the soul toward liberation. And within that map there is a profound reason, almost a cosmic kindness, why the peaceful deities appear before the wrathful ones. According to the Bardo Thodol, known in the West as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the first week after death is filled with the radiance of the 42 peaceful deities. These luminous beings emerge from the heart chakra, carrying an overwhelming brilliance so bright, so pure, so unfiltered that it reflects the deepest essence of enlightenment itself. Yet we must remember these deities are not external gods, descending from some distant heaven. They are symbolic projections of a truth. Far more intimate, they are the radiance of the deceased's own awakened mind. To the individual who passed on, these deities appear as an invitation and offering of the most direct path toward liberation. Their brightness is not meant to blind, but to remind. Their presence says, in essence, this is your true nature if you can recognize it. And this is why Tibetan masters emphasize that the peaceful deities come first. They represent the easiest, gentlest door toward enlightenment. If the consciousness can recognize the peace, clarity, and compassion emanating from these deities as its own intrinsic nature, then liberation from the cycle of rebirth becomes immediately possible. But what happens if the deceased does not recognize them? When the peaceful forms fade, if the first opportunity is missed, the journey continues into the second week. Now the visions shift. The calm, serene deities recede, and the 58 wrathful deities appear. They arise from the crown chakra, embodying fierce forms, terrifying, chaotic, thunderous in their presence. But again, these beings are not external demons. Their ferocity reflects the unresolved karmic patterns within the deceased's mind. These wrathful figures are not punishments. They are mirrors. Where there was serenity in the first week, there is confrontation in the second. Where there was clarity, there is now confusion. Where there was love, there is now fear. Yet beneath the frightening appearance lies a deeper truth. These wrathful deities are still aspects of the mind, only now they reveal the aspects we refuse to face in life. Why peace comes before terror. Let us pause for a moment and ask the essential question. Why does the soul meet peaceful forms before terrifying ones? The answer is both spiritual and psychological. Spiritually, the peaceful deities reflect the fundamental nature of consciousness, its purity, clarity, and vastness. Tibetan Buddhism teaches that the first opportunity for liberation must spring from this ultimate truth. Enlightenment, after all, is not the product of fear, but the recognition of innate wisdom. Psychologically, humans instinctively respond better to calm guidance than to overwhelming confrontation. Even after death, consciousness retains this same tendency. And so the cosmos, in its compassion, gives the soul the gentlest chance first. If the peace is not recognized, then and only then does the mind encounter the wrathful forms, which serve as a more forceful wake-up call. Fear, in this context, is not an enemy. It is a teacher. The Bardo as a mirror of the mind. The Bardo is not a separate realm filled with gods and monsters. It is a mirror held up to the consciousness. When the deceased meets peaceful deities, they are meeting compassion within themselves. When they meet wrathful deities, they are meeting their own shadow. This is not metaphorical, this is literal within the Tibetan tradition. Just as dreams are shaped by our subconscious, the visions of the Bardo are shaped by our past actions, unresolved emotions, unintegrated fears, and suppressed desires. Therefore, the peaceful deities represent unclouded awareness. The wrathful deities represent repressed aspects of the psyche. The entire Bardo is the mind, revealing itself without the filter of the physical body. This is why in Tibetan Buddhism, death is viewed not as an ending, but as the most profound psychological journey, a final confrontation with the self. When fear reveals liberation, let us turn to the key insight. When the dying projects fear or anger onto the Bardo visions, why does that lead to awakening? Because fear is simply the mind, encountering its own reflection without understanding it. Imagine this. You walk into a dark room and see a shadow moving. You panic, but when the light comes on, you realize it was only your own silhouette. The Bardo functions the same way. When the deceased sees a terrifying deity, what they are truly seeing is their unresolved anger, their unhealed wounds, their denied desires, their unintegrated pain. And when they recognize this, when they realize the monster is their own shadow, they instantly become free from its power. This moment of recognition is enlightenment. Carl Jung and the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Here, Eastern spirituality intersects beautifully with Western psychology. Carl Jung famously described the shadow, the hidden aspects of ourselves that we deny or repress. When we ignore the shadow, it leaks out through dreams, nightmares, anxiety, or destructive behavior. Jung argued that personal growth requires integrating the shadow, rather than rejecting it. This mirrors the Bardo almost perfectly. The peaceful deities are the conscious virtues we identify with. The wrathful deities are the repressed emotions we deny. Liberation comes from recognizing both as parts of the self. Jung would say that the Bardo journey is not only a spiritual process, but also the ultimate form of psychological integration. The Tibetan masters would say, yes, this is why fear itself becomes the gate to enlightenment, the moment of awakening. In both traditions, the key moment comes when the individual finally sees the truth. This frightening figure is not a demon, it is me. The Bardo Thurol states, do not flee from the wrathful deities. They are your mind in its unrecognized form. And so the soul learns, fear is not an outside threat. Anger is not an enemy attacking you. Chaos is not punishment. All of it, the light and the dark, is the mind revealing itself. To see this truth is to awaken. To awaken is to become free. Emotional awareness as liberation. If we translate the Bardo teachings into psychological language, we arrive at a powerful message. Emotion is not an obstacle to enlightenment, it is a teacher. Fear is a mirror. Anger is a doorway. Sadness is a message. Confusion is an invitation. Everything you feel shows you what you cling to, and every clinging is a chance to awaken. The moment you become aware, truly aware of what you fear or avoid, that awareness becomes liberation, the teaching of the wrathful deities. The Tibetan Book of the Dead leaves us with a profound teaching. Fear not the wrathful gods, for they are your shadow and your teacher. This is the essence of the second week of the Bardo. Peace reveals your original nature. Terror reveals the parts of you that you have not yet embraced. Integration of both leads to freedom. When the soul finally sees that the peaceful gods and the wrathful gods arise from the same mind, it steps beyond fear, beyond illusion, beyond rebirth. It steps into awakening. As we enter the third chapter of our exploration, we stand at the threshold of one of the most profound teachings in Tibetan Buddhism. The idea that the intermediate state, the Bardo, is not merely a passage between death and rebirth, but a rare, luminous opportunity for liberation. This is the moment when a departed consciousness can finally see itself without distortion. And if it recognizes what it sees, it can break free from the endless wheel of samsara. Let us unfold this with care, depth, and a spirit of philosophical curiosity. The Bardo as a moment of radical clarity. Tibetan teachings describe the intermediate state as a realm in which the deceased can perceive their own mind with unprecedented clarity. What appears as peaceful deities or wrathful figures what the texts call the peaceful ones. And wrathful ones is not a vision imposed by gods, spirits, or cosmic beings. It is the raw unveiling of the mind's own nature. If the deceased recognizes this truth, every terrifying form becomes a gateway to liberation. Every peaceful light becomes an invitation to awakening. In this sense, the Bardo is not a trial by fire. It is a once-in-a-lifetime moment when consciousness stands face to face with its own essence. And this moment is not simply about death. Tibetan Buddhism boldly claims that all of life can be divided into 6 bardos: waking life, dreaming, meditation, the moment of death, the luminous clarity after death, and finally, the visionary experiences we explore now. Life itself, every shift in awareness, is a spiritual training ground. This is the first key message. Every transition in life is a rehearsal for the transition of death. 2. The 100 deities of the Bardo. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes 100 deities appearing in 2 great sequences. During the initial encounters, the deceased meets 42 peaceful deities, beings that radiate clarity, compassion, and gentle luminosity. These arise from the heart chakra, the symbolic center of innate wisdom. During the second week of Bardo consciousness encounters, 58 wrathful deities emerging from the crown chakra. These figures are far more vivid, thunderous, and overwhelming. Their appearance is shaped by the karmic imprints the deceased accumulated throughout life actions, intentions, fears, and desires that have not yet been resolved. To a Western listener, these might sound like mythological characters. Yet the text insists on something radically psychological. These beings are not external. They are projections of your own mind. Peaceful deities symbolize clarity. Wrathful deities symbolize the distorted emotions you have not yet integrated: anger, fear, greed, confusion. In modern terms, the peaceful deities represent your higher self. The wrathful deities are the shadow of your psyche. The question is not, why do they appear? The real question is, will you recognize them? 3. Chönyid Bardo, the Bardo of experiencing reality. The phase we are exploring now is called Chönyid Bardo, the Bardo of experiencing reality. It begins after the deceased has passed through the first stage, the moment of the clear light known as Chönyid Bardo, and continues for roughly 2 weeks. This is the moment when the departed consciousness begins to perceive visions, shaped by its own mind. For the spiritually trained, the visions appear as peaceful, bright and soothing. For the untrained or fearful, the same mental projections appear distorted, chaotic, and terrifying. The term Chönyid itself means the true nature of reality, or the essence of things as they really are. In this stage, consciousness is given a profound opportunity, not to escape from visions, but to understand their true nature. If the departed recognizes that the visions before them are mental projections, liberation is immediate. But if fear overwhelms the mind, the consciousness drifts toward the next Bardo, the search for rebirth. The teaching is simple and astonishing. Your freedom or bondage depends not on what you see, but on how you understand what you see. 4. Wrathful deities, not demons, but transformative energy. In Western culture, wrathful deities might easily be interpreted as demons or hostile spirits. But in Buddhist Tantra, wrathful figures symbolize something far more profound: the transformative power of wisdom cutting through delusion. Wrathful deities are fierce because compassion sometimes must be fierce. They represent the psychic energy required to break through ignorance, attachment, and fear. They are the spiritual equivalent of psychological shock therapy, the mind confronting itself with absolute honesty. Modern interpreters often describe these wrathful beings as projections of the psychological turmoil that arises when consciousness, detached from the body, has no option but to confront all unresolved emotions at once. These are not cosmic punishments. They are the mind's own attempts to heal. 5. Everything you see is the mind's projection, a Yogacara perspective. One of the most powerful statements in the Tibetan Book of the Dead is this line: 心之所现，幻影非真. All appearances are but projections of consciousness, and therefore illusions. This reflects the central philosophy of Buddhist Yogacara, which asserts that all phenomena, everything we see, hear, fear, or desire, are projections of consciousness. The world is a mirror. What you perceive is the reflection of your own mind. Thus, heaven is a projection. Hell is a projection. Peaceful beings are projections. Demons are projections. And the bardo is simply the mind watching itself without filter. When this realization dawns, even the most terrifying wrathful deity dissolves like mist. Fear itself becomes light, and consciousness returns to its original clarity, known in the texts as primordial luminosity. This is liberation, not a place, not a reward, but a recognition. 6. The ultimate invitation of the bardo. What does the bardo teach us not only about death, but about life? It teaches that fear is a mirror. Anger is a mirror. Every emotional storm is a projection of the self asking to be understood. And the moment you understand it, truly see it not as an enemy, but as a reflection, you step into the path of awakening. We do not achieve liberation by running away from fear. We achieve it by seeing fear as part of ourselves. So the bardo whispers this final message: when you face the shadows of your mind with clarity, those shadows become your teachers. This is not only the teaching of death, it is the teaching of life. If this journey into the bardo has sparked reflection within you about the nature of consciousness, the meaning of fear, or the possibility of awakening, I invite you to stay connected. More explorations of Tibetan wisdom, Eastern philosophy, and the psychology of the inner world are coming. If you'd like to walk this path with me, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter of this journey into the mind and beyond. Dear friends, today we enter one of the most profound, mysterious, and surprisingly practical teachings ever written about the human mind, the final stage of the Tibetan Bardo, the realm where the dead meet. Not demons, not angels, not external judges, but the unfiltered essence of their own consciousness. This teaching is not merely about what happens after our last breath. It is a psychological mirror, a philosophical warning, and ultimately a guide for how to live with greater awareness, courage, and compassion. Let us dive into the heart of this teaching. 1. When fear is taken as reality. In the 4th stage of the Bardo narrative, the Tibetan Book of the Dead describes a powerful and unsettling truth. If the deceased mistakes the visions before them as literal external beings, if fear turns into panic, if craving turns into grasping, their consciousness sinks into a darker dimension. This descent is not punishment in any religious sense. Rather, it is the natural gravity of the mind, falling into its own unexamined impulses. Fear contracts the mind, attachment narrows it, and that narrowing becomes the seed of the next cycle of rebirth. The teaching summarizes this danger in a single phrase. Simshik so hyun huan yang bijin. What the mind perceives is a projection of consciousness. The apparition is not real, and here lies the philosophical pivot. If the deceased can recognize this truth, if they realize, even for a moment, that terrifying form is my own mind, the illusion collapses, fear dissolves, and consciousness returns to its natural radiance, the state known as clear light, the doorway to liberation. This is not mysticism. This is psychological clarity at its most radical form. 2. The gods of the Bardo are mirrors, not monsters. The Tibetan Book of the Dead makes an astonishing claim. The frightening deities that appear after death are not external demons, not spirits, not punishers. They are the shadows of the mind. Our anger, our craving, our suppressed guilt, our ignored wounds, all taking shape in the only language consciousness has left, symbolic imagery. The text summarizes this gently but firmly. The fear you see is not outside you. It is your own mind appearing before you. Do not flee from it. Recognize it as yourself. This is the ultimate psychological revolution. It means the soul is not judged by something outside, it is revealed to itself. Fear becomes a mirror. Anger becomes a torch. Even the darkest emotion becomes a teacher. In the threshold of death, we learn the same lesson we avoided in life. Nothing we fear is entirely external. Everything emerges first from the interior. 3. The practical meaning of illusion. Why this teaching matters now. Simshik so hyun, huan yang bijin. The apparition is not real. This truth, spoken in a mystical text centuries old, actually contains a modern, psychologically grounded insight. If even the afterlife is shaped by consciousness, then the suffering within life is equally shaped by the mind. This does not mean the world is fake. It means that the meaning and emotional weight we assign to events are colored by the lens of our perception. Your fear of rejection probably comes from old wounds, not the present moment. Your anger at someone likely hides a deeper unmet need. Your insecurity may not be a judgment from others, but the echo of a forgotten moment of shame. In this sense, every difficult moment in life is a small bardo, a transitional space where the mind projects, reacts, and reveals itself. The Tibetans understood this long before psychotherapy existed. 4. The Christian parallel light as judgment, judgment as light. To Western listeners, this concept might sound foreign, but it has a powerful resonance in Christianity. In the Gospel of John, we find the line, "Light came into the world, but people loved darkness rather than the light." This passage has been interpreted for centuries as a warning about sin, but there is a deeper psychological meaning. God's light does not judge us. It reveals us. If the heart is darkened by anger or shame, the radiance of divine love can feel like judgment, not because God condemns, but because we are unprepared to face ourselves. The Bardo says the same. When consciousness meets the ultimate light, we either recognize it and awaken, or recoil from it and fall back into illusion. Different religions, same insight. The light is inner truth, not external punishment. 5. Jung, the shadow that controls us. Carl Jung once wrote, "What is not made conscious returns as fate." This is perhaps the clearest Western articulation of the Tibetan teaching. Jung's shadow contains everything within us. We deny, suppress, or refuse to acknowledge. Anger, envy, ego, fear. If we refuse to face it, it does not disappear. It dictates our behavior from beneath awareness. It shows up in nightmares, anxiety, compulsions, or self-sabotaging patterns that feel fated. Jung's insight mirrors the Bardo perfectly. The terrifying deity is not a demon. It is the shadow, and liberation comes only when the shadow is recognized as part of oneself. Thus, the Bardo is not simply a post-mortem guide. It is a manual for inner integration, a blueprint for becoming whole. 6. The Bardo as a manual for the living. We often imagine spiritual texts about death to be grim, superstitious, or detached from real life. But the Tibetan Book of the Dead is the opposite. It is an instruction manual for living well, for navigating the in-between spaces of life. The moment after heartbreak, the moment before a major decision, the confusion of identity transitions, the stillness of meditation, the strangeness of dreams, the silence between two phases of life. Every transition, every uncertainty, every loss is a bardo, and every bardo hides the same lesson. The mind creates fear, the mind creates light, and awakening comes from recognizing the difference. 7. Death is not an ending. It is the final classroom. The Bardo teachings insist, even in death the soul continues to learn, not in the sense of acquiring new facts, but in the sense of finally seeing itself clearly. Death strips away distraction, ego, pretense. Nothing remains but consciousness meeting its own truth. And in that encounter, in that flash of recognition, liberation becomes possible. It is the ultimate paradox. The moment we confront our own illusions is the moment we become free from them. If today's exploration has stirred something in you, if the idea that fear is a mirror, that anger can be a torch, that even the afterlife may be shaped by the inner world, then I invite you to stay with this journey, because the next chapter, the third world of death, the gate of rebirth, reveals how consciousness chooses its next life, how karma moves like a river, and how spiritual insight can break the cycle altogether. So if this teaching resonated with your heart, please subscribe to this channel and continue walking with me through this extraordinary landscape where psychology, spirituality, and philosophy meet. We talk about death, but only so we may understand life more deeply. And on this journey, I am honored to walk beside you. See you in the next chapter.